Welcome to On the Dot.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining our Google Hangout. Just a couple quick housekeeping items. If you have any comments or questions or concerns or anything at all, feel free to post them to our Google Plus page. I'll be monitoring those throughout the show and following up with some of them after the show. You can also tweet us on Twitter at GoDaddy or hashtag GD Hangout. We'll be looking for those as well. But we've got a great show coming for you today, and I'm going to let Joe kick things off and introduce everybody.
All right, thanks a lot, Colby. Today we're going to talk about what names are worth, which I think is one of the paramount issues when you're deciding to either invest in names or have names already in your portfolio, or you're a small business and you're looking to buy a new name to use for your business. You have to really understand what names are worth. And to be able to do that, we're super lucky to have two of the best name evaluators, in my opinion, in the industry join us today. We have Paige Howe, who I watch consistently on some of the other podcasts that they have, and the Domain Sherpa Show, and some of the other live events that we've been able to see in the conferences. And more often than not, when I hear his valuation on a name, and then I look and see a name that actually sold, it's really close. It's pretty close to dead on. So I'm really happy to have him be a part of the show. Also, we have Ammar Kubba, who's going to be joining us today. And Ammar has bought and sold names for his own personal portfolio for a long time. He's also an expert, and he's seen by many in the industry as a leader in being able to price names. But one thing that really, I think, gives him a great benefit is he's started and run several companies in the domain aftermarket, such as aftermarket.com and TrafficZ, where he got to see not only his own portfolio, but also the performance of all the other people who were part of his platform, and see what types of names sold, what they sold for, what type of traffic they were able to get, and really glean a lot of important information when making a decision on what a name's worth and why. So we're really honored to have them. Ammar is...
What's up?
Ammar is, as I said, a great guest to have. Run a couple of companies, and right now he's taking a little bit of break after selling several of his companies. And it's just an honor to be able to have him to have the extra time to join us today. And Paige is in the middle of a couple different things. He's always very busy, so I'm glad that he was able to take some time away from his schedule and jump in to be able to join us today.
Absolutely.
All right, great to be here.
Thanks.
All right, thanks a lot. What we're going to talk about today is what names are worth, and I have a couple of different questions that we want to ask, and then we're going to jump into actually just evaluating names, because we think you can get a good feel for what they're worth by actually jumping in and starting the process and kind of getting your feet wet right away. And we've been honored to have hundreds of names submitted to us before the Hangout, and it was hard to narrow down the list, but we narrowed it down to a few names that we're going to be able to evaluate for you live in a couple minutes, and we'll kind of go over why we think they're worth what they're worth so that you can get a good feel for that. So thanks for taking your time to send those in advance. So Paige, I'd like to know if you could tell us a little bit about what makes a name worth more than a registration fee.
What makes a name worth more than a registration fee? So I think I tried to think about what my answer would be, and I think there's three things I look at. Scarcity. When I first started doing this back in 2000, there was a sense when you went to buy a domain name that literally you got the impression that every single word or combination of 1, 2, or 3 words was taken in ComNet and Nord. And so the idea was you couldn't get a name for registration fee. It just wasn't possible, and you had to go ahead and go to some of the aftermarkets. Much like if you said, hey, I think it's like the 1900s and I should be able to buy a piece of land and just be able to pay the property taxes. And that should be it. I shouldn't have to pay anything for the land. I should just pay the property taxes and I get the land. But to the extent that every desirable piece of land has been taken, at least in the U.S., all of a sudden you have to pay someone else who used to own the land to have that land. So I think the first thing is the idea that it's scarce. The name you want has been taken. And so then you have to look at replacement options. Does the name that someone wants, does the name that you have a lot of replacement options that can be got for reg fee? And if it does, you're hoping a buyer wants your name specifically but you may not be able to always force them into a corner and say, you've got to pay me for this name, you've got to pay me my asking price. But I think the biggest factor is simply desirability. Does someone want it? You know, we spend a lot of money on a lot of things, and especially businesses. If you look at companies with $1 million budgets, $10 million budgets, $100 million budgets, you know, what are they spending $2,000, $5,000, and $10,000 or $20,000 on, or up to $1 million on, whether it's marketing campaigns or things like that, and they want each one to be the best. They want it to be efficient, they want it to be optimized, and then there's a sense that you desire to have the best sign, the best style, the best first impression. So I think desirability would be the third thing.
Well, that's really, I think that's a great answer, and I'm going to ask Ammar about what kind of tools or resources he uses, but before I do that, I think it's a good segue to talk about domaintools.com, which is something I really use a lot, and it really goes to Paige's point. When I'm trying to find a name that I think might be valuable for an investment, one of the first things I do is I look at domain tools, and I try and find out what other extensions are taken, because it'll show you right away. Okay, is ComNet and org taken? And then I look at who are they taken by. If they're taken by companies that are actually using them, or people that have been using them for a long time and they're registered for a long time, then the chances are, if I'm able to pick up that name, I'm going to have a much easier time selling that as an investment at a higher value than if I look at it and there's a lot of other extensions that are available for registration right now that's not very scarce, so people can just jump to the net if they want, or the org, or whatever they want to buy. And B, what I look at is, hey, who owns these names? Is it companies? You know, is it people that have a lot of money? Is it a startup? Is it a person? Is it another domain investor? Because if those 3 extensions or 4 extensions or whatever I'm looking at are all owned by domain investors, well, guess what? Then it's probably not that scarce, and they're probably going to go to one of those other investors. If I price my name too high, they go, well, I'll just go with one of these other ones, and I'll purchase it from them. You can't do that if the name's really scarce, and if they're being used by other companies that really don't want to change their business model, then you have a much more scarce asset, and people are going to be able to pay more for that. So I want to turn it over to Ammar to kind of ask him what tools or resources he uses when he's looking at a name to invest in.
So if I'm looking at a name that's already registered, and are you asking me if I'm buying a name in the aftermarket? How do I look at it, or am I looking to register a name?
I think I would go with both, because both are important. And as you know, sometimes when I'm looking to buy a name, I'll bounce it off you and say, hey, what do you think about this? So.
Okay, so let's just start with the things that I'm looking at in general when I'm looking, whether it's an aftermarket name or a hand reg name. I'm looking at a few key points. I see the market going primarily to brands and brandability, and I think there's been a shift that's happened over time from, it used to be you always just wanted keywords, and now I think you only want the keywords if they're also brandable and memorable. So I'm looking at the brandability of a domain that I might be wanting to buy, and it doesn't even have to be a word, but it's got to be something that's brandable and memorable. I'm looking at to see, does it convey credibility? So I think that's one of the most important selling points when you're trying to sell to an end user, is explaining to them that the right domain can lend credibility to their business when they're competing online against all these other companies, and the online world is only growing. So I think conveying credibility is very important. And then when I'm looking to buy a name for myself, the most important thing I think to look at first and foremost, if it doesn't pass this test, there's no point, can you build a business on it? Mm-hmm. And a business doesn't have to be something that is for profit. A blog is a business, right? Or it doesn't have to be specifically for profit, but is there something that you could build on that makes sense? And if you can't think of a reason to use it, then to me, that kind of kills it for me, and I probably wouldn't buy that name. Whenever I buy a name, I imagine what are the different businesses that I would build on it, or the different uses I would have for that name. So, but that being said, I guess that the primary tools I use when I'm evaluating to buy are domain tools, as you said, and there's so many different aspects of domain tools that you can use. You can look at what else is taken around, in that same extension. You can also use it to generate other similar names and see if those are taken or available. You know, if you're really trying to build a brand, you want to also kind of protect that brand and buy around it. You know, I'm not suggesting that you buy ComNet.org, you know, XYZ Co, link, and everything. I'm saying buy names that are similar. Like, I always try to get the singular and the plural if possible. I mean, I think that's a really huge benefit if you can have both of those. Then I also look at you know, name bio and DN prices to see how much similar names are going for, so that I can see if I'm going to go sell it in the aftermarket, what can I expect to get for it.
Right.
And then I do Google searches to see, you know, what the search volume is, who's advertising on those keywords or for the brands, and what companies are using terms in that arena. So those are the main tools that I use, and that's probably the thought process that I go through when I'm considering buying a name. And then if it's in the aftermarket, I'm going to do some history on who I'm buying from. So it's important to see, you know, who you're negotiating against, and you know, if you've been in the business for a while, you'll figure out, you know, you're going to use different methods with different sellers.
Right.
And if it's a corporation that's owned it for a while but not using it, that's a whole different ballgame than a domain investor, than a mom and pop business that, you know, maybe is not using it.
Right. I think that's a great point. Another thing that I think Domain Tools does really well is it shows you the history of names.
Right.
So one thing that I like to look at too is, where was the name parked? You know, you can check the name server history. You can look at the who is history. You can find out, was this name registered by another investor for 15 years? Did it drop a lot? You know, did it get a bunch of different investors that owned it? Was it parked at a lot of different parking companies and then just keeps dropping? Because if that's true, they're not getting offers and they're not making any money on it. So maybe this isn't a good name for you to pick up. Or if it's been owned by the same person for a really long time and it's a corporation, you know, like you said, that's a whole different ballgame in how you're going to approach them.
Right. It doesn't mean it's impossible to get, but it is a very different approach.
Right. Awesome. Paige, what would you look for when you're investing in names that you want to resell?
The good question. Actually, I wanted to chime in on tools. Even though we all use online stuff, you know, I have a thesaurus right here.
Mm-hmm.
I have a dictionary right here. I have an atlas right here. Because even though you can find out everything on Wikipedia, sometimes what you're looking for is perspective outside the information that's given to you. So sometimes, especially when you think about selling a name, and I know I'm jumping ahead, the source helps me because I look and say, how much better, if it's a two-word name, is one of my words than the next one that someone could pick from. And it really gives you an idea whether your name has that essence or that quality or that desirability that should really command a premium price. So anyway, I just thought I'd point that out. Besides the online tools, don't be afraid to go old school.
Paige also has an encyclopedia that he uses a lot. He has a whole collection at his house.
No, I must say I drew the line there. So, all right, Joe, your question again, sir.
What would you look for when you're investing in a name to resell? What kind of things would you look for before making a purchase?
I believe it's important to buy names that will sell for more than you paid for them in the future.
That's important. That is important.
So that's really what I look for. And I think, you know, a couple times even in the first 10 minutes of our conversation, we've said something, and then we've said comma, or the opposite can be true. And so it's hard sometimes to pick hard and fast rules because there's always going to be circumstances where potentially the exact opposite is true. But what I've been doing for probably the last 5 or 6 years is trying to group the names I'm buying into certain themes so that if I'm rehearsing a sales pitch or if I'm rehearsing a content page or a landing page, I want to be able to apply that landing page across maybe 50 to 100 to 200 different businesses that may just have a different topic or a different geography. And so what I'm trying to do is paint the picture of going to the next step, almost like a furniture store. You go in there and you see one nice couch, and then the guy says, here's the fabric book, and you can get whatever couch, you can get this couch in all these different fabrics. So I think lately what I've been trying to do, as opposed to just looking at every name as a specific thing, is I've been trying to group what I'm buying in certain groups to see if that will help. But other than that, anything's wide open. Do I think it's a reasonable speculation? Part of buying domain names is really we're trying to guess where lightning is going to strike. And if you told me you knew where lightning was going to strike, where someone in the world was going to wake up today and say, I have a business, I have a budget, I have a project, and I need a name that does this, then we all want to run and get there first and have great names to show that person. And I think that's a big part of the wholesale value of a domain name is does it look extremely likely that someone's going to want to buy that from you tomorrow? But I think looking at names longer term, where you think it takes 2 to 5 years maybe of holding them, then you have to sit there and just really shoot for high quality and high desirability.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, I think those are a lot of the major things that you'd want to consider. I think another thing that would be smart if you're investing in names is to kind of go into a broader pool, like you said. Pick a vertical or a niche that you think there's real value in, and then figure out what names you can invest in so that you're not waiting for lightning to strike that one name. You might have 20 or 30 that are in there that you really feel are good quality names, and you're going to hope that you get somebody to hit one of those 20 that you could sell to cover your expenses and make some money on the other ones as well.
And I think you have a credibility when you're talking to someone. When you've sold a name, you bought a name for, on the low end, $50 and sold it for $3,000, and you're selling a name similar, you've got authority and credibility that comes through in the negotiation. The kind of jousting of negotiation, where each side is pairing with the other person to try to see if they can get it for less or get it for more. And I think when you've got names in a certain area that you know have sold, I think it just gives you that maybe that extra energy or credibility to really hold your line.
Yeah, I think that's another reason why it's good to check name bio or DN sale price or sale prices. There's a couple different sites you could check, but those are good to get comps and kind of figure things out to make sure, not only for you, but a lot of times when people are approaching you, this might be the first name they're buying, and it's good to kind of make them feel a little bit better to show, hey, this is in range of a normal price that other people have paid for a similar name, so it's not like we're trying to charge you some exorbitant rate. This is really the value that we can show you.
Yeah. And then just to kind of backtrack a little bit to when we were talking about domain tools, we had a couple questions on that, so I just wanted to address those while those were top of mind.
Yeah.
First off, I'd like to say, Paige, people are loving the metaphors you're dropping, so keep that coming. And then Ammar, so this one's for you. You mentioned a few tools earlier. Johnny missed them, though. He got domain tools and name bio, and what was the other tools that you mentioned?
I was saying I also look at there's other sites similar to name bio, like DN prices. And I also do Google searches just to see what advertisers are bidding on those terms, in the domain name. I do both an exact match and a broad match search. And then I'll also look at what companies have names, domains similar to the one that you're considering buying or selling. So you kind of know who is a potential buyer if it's a name that you're considering buying, and who for a potential future buyer, if it's a name that you're considering buying or selling. Either way, you always want to look at who's using similar domain names around that, or who could be interested in those names.
Awesome, thanks for that. Yeah. And then also he wants to know, do you know why Domain Tools doesn't support GTLDs yet, like .nyc or .la?
Support in terms of what? I mean, we do. You can search for any GTLD on there. If you do a reverse whois, all the GTLDs are supported. I think the only thing that's not fully, the GTLDs aren't fully integrated, is maybe with the domain monitors. But everything else, I believe, is fully GTLD integrated.
Perfect.
I could be wrong, but I believe they are.
Trust you. And yeah, that's it for now. That caught us up on the tool questions.
Okay, cool.
I'm going to get one more question out there, and then we're going to jump into actual evaluation, which I think will be great to show people live how are we doing this when it really comes down to looking at some names, and I think that'll give people a better grasp of how we tie everything together. But one important question that I got a lot before we did the Hangout today was, how do you value some of these GTLDs versus a traditional TLD like a com or net? With the all the new TLDs that are coming out, how do you really figure out what they're worth when we're getting questions on their value and there's not a lot of comps maybe out there?
Right. So I think Paige is way more involved in the GTLDs than I am, but I have been following and I'm very interested, and I've started making a few investments in them. But for me, it's actually the same exact evaluation process as you would do with ComNet and Org or the legacy TLDs. It's brandable. I would not buy a GTLD, a new GTLD domain that doesn't make sense. So, and that I can't build a business on. So I'm not going to buy cars dot. I don't know. There's so many GTL. Give me one that doesn't make sense, right? So cars dot something that doesn't make sense.
Pizza dot furniture.
Yeah,
that's a good one. Pizza dot furniture. I'm not going to buy that. It just doesn't make sense unless you actually can build a business on it. So this is a good example, right? What if you invent a new kind of chair or table that's built for you to sit, watch football, drink your beer, and eat your pizza? Now it's a special kind of thing, and then it makes sense. But if you're just sitting on it, buying that and thinking like, oh, well, somebody's going to want that someday because it's pizza, because pizza.com sold for millions of dollars, that's not a good way to look at it.
Right.
It has to make sense. So it's got to be brandable, it's got to be memorable, and you got to be able to build a business on it.
Nice.
At least that's how I'm looking at it right now.
Right.
And I'm making real long bets on it. I'm only buying stuff that if it makes sense and it's real obvious, but I'm not going to go buy 3-word new GTLD domain long tail stuff. It's just, to me, that's too speculative and too far down the road. I'd rather save my money and go buy stuff that I know has value today, rather than just wait.
Right, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Paige, what do you think about the GTLDs and how to evaluate them versus looking at, let's say, a .com?
Well, it's amazing. Every time I think I know what I think about the new GTLDs, my opinion, changes, because I'm going to say two completely opposite things, and I believe both of them to be true. In some ways, you can't really value new TLDs because we don't know what they are and we don't know what they're going to be. So you either have to take the approach that they're going to be awesome substitutes that multi-billion-dollar companies can use to market multiple billions of dollars worth of products, and they should be priced accordingly. But last year, a bunch of them were put out at prices between $30 and $200 a year, and no one bought them, and that's why they're available for us domain investors. So, I mean, that in itself, the fact that we can buy stuff for even the high annual premium ones of $200 and $300, but we think some magic happens where once we buy it for $300, it's worth $150,000, it's worth $1.5 million, and I don't know which one of those things is true. Now, we'd like to think that, yeah, we're buying it because we're so smart and we know about the industry and no one knows about these things, and we're going to buy them for this and they're going to be worth a bunch. So, on one hand, they're either worth very little because of the way they're being marketed, but they could be worth the same as .coms, millions of dollars. And then so that's one thing. But then the exact opposite of that would be they're worth some discount to it based upon the risk. So if you say, well, eventually a great name like Office.Supplies might be worth $5 million. But we don't know if it's going to be. So how much do you discount back for the risk? And maybe someone wants to buy it now, and you can't really get the $5 million now. So maybe you try to get the $300,000 or the $200,000. So are we selling it based upon what it's going to be, or some present value of what it's going to be? And that's why there's so much uncertainty about them. I think they're the same as .com in many ways, and that as a domain name investor, you buy it when it's available, and you hold it till someone else wants to buy it. And that's what we do in .com, and that's what we're now doing in the new TLDs.
Yeah, let me add to that, though. I think that The problem is a lot of the people that are probably investing in the new GTLDs are newer to the industry, and that this is, it's being marketed to a lot of people as, hey, it's not too late. This is your the second coming, and you can get in. And so the example you gave of office.supplies, if maybe it's going to be worth $5 million one day, I have no idea, and you're saying, well, maybe you should sell it for 100, 200, 300,000 today. I don't even know if that's realistic. You got to see what OfficeSupplies.com is going to go for. So you really have to take a look at what you're competing against in .com, even .net and .org, with your new GTLD domain that you have. So I think you can scare off a lot of buyers, and I think that's a mistake a lot of people are going to make, that they get a great new GTLD and they, an end user, an actual end user approaches them and wants to buy the name, and they say, oh, I want $250,000 for it. That end user, chances are they're going to be like, see ya, I'm going to go buy my .com, .net, or .org, for the same or less. And so I think there's going to be a period in time where people investing in these new GTLDs need to be realistic, and they need to get volume going before they can go shoot for the moon. So I think you have to know what you have. You might have something that's valuable, very valuable in 5 or 10 years, but right now it's just maybe marginally valuable, or just certainly not as valuable as what you think. So I think that's an important thing to remember. You have to understand what the present value of it is, not what the future value of it is, when you're trying to sell it to an end user today. Because there are there's people selling GTLDs or trying to sell GTLDs for more than the .com equivalent. And that just doesn't make sense to me.
Right, I think that goes back to valuing the name by looking at some of the comps and really understanding the market. So I think that's a really good point. It was about 2 months ago I was negotiating for a name, and it was a really great brandable name that we were trying to buy from one of our customers, and it was a little bit of a misspelling, but that's what they wanted for their brand, and it's a great brand. And I went to the guy who owned the name, and he said he wanted $5 million for the name, and I said, look, I can get the correct spelling.com for that for a heck of a lot less, and then they don't have to keep talking about it on TV that, this is how we spell our name. We buy the right one. They want to use this as a brand because they think it's quirky and good and it's going to be a benefit to the business, but you're priced so high over the correct spelling that it makes no sense, and that brought the guy down. Right. To realize what the market's at. So it's really good to realize what the market's at.
Well, that's going back to what I was saying. You got to know your competition. Who are the other people that this potential end user could go to and buy their name instead of your name? Yeah. That's what's the other supply out there in the world. If you got the last one, then sure, you can hold tight for your $5 million. But in your case that you just said, the guy could go get the correct spelling for less than that. That doesn't make sense.
But we have to agree that valuation of domain names doesn't make sense.
I agree with.
Right? I want to get my arms around it ever since I've been in the business. The reason I love some of the tools that Ammar's come up with, domain tools, is you want to get your arms around it. You want to feel like you understand the business you're in and the environment that you're in. And then things happen that just don't make sense, and you're like, you know what, at the same point, I just got a gut feeling that this guy really wants my name, and even if there's a bunch of great substitutes, I'm going to ask for an unreasonable price, and as long as you keep saying no, you may scare him off, and you may find out at the end that he already decided in his mind he wanted that name no matter what it cost, And the tough part is you're never gonna know, and it's very hard to have the best of both worlds. It's very hard to say I'm going to hold out for 20 times what it's worth, because at the end I can always go back to the guy and say, I'll take your last offer. But then you realize sometimes you can push it so hard that the guy says no, and the guy says, no, I'm out. So I think, it's like a poker hand. It's your poker hand. You get to play it. No one knows your cards. You got your money in the middle of the table. You may win or you may lose. And then we have this whole logic thing that we're talking about now, so I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, no, you're right. You should, and that's the thing. I've sold names for ridiculous numbers, and it's a lot more than what you might have thought. But it makes sense for that company because they really wanted that domain. And what I'm saying, though, is sometimes though you have to understand that if there are alternatives, you could push the guy to the alternative. And it all depends on what your risk tolerance is. And if you don't need to sell, then yeah, that's the best position you can possibly be in. But I think some of our audience probably wants to be able to do volume, right? They want to be able to flip names and then reinvest the profits into more names, and then kind of build up their portfolios that way, just like the way you and I did. So it's two different strategies, I guess, right? And maybe you have a portion of your names that you are just gonna, of your portfolio, that you're just gonna hold tight. You're gonna say, this is my gold, and I'm not gonna sell it for less than X. And then you have another portion of your portfolio that's just kind of your silver and bronze, and that you're willing to flip, and it's more of a commodity, and you're just trying to make some nominal amount of profit. I mean, I hate selling a name for less than 10 times what I paid for it, no matter what it is, right? But sometimes that's not possible, and sometimes you can get 100 times what you paid for it, or 500 times. But sometimes you're happy, well, you know what, I got 5 times what I paid. That's a pretty good return in any other industry. So I think we've gotten a little
spoiled.
Yeah, we got a little spoiled.
I mean, we're spoiled, and it affects our buying because it allows us to overpay. And you say, well, if I normally do 10 times what I pay, even if I have to pay up a little for this name, that's okay. I'll just settle for 5 times what I paid on this one because I really want it. And we do spoil ourselves with our expectations of it.
Yep.
All right, I want to get into some of the evaluations so we can kind of get people's hands wrapped around how does this work.
Yeah.
So,
and I just want to say too, I know we have some questions in the group, but we'll get to them after we do the valuations. So hold tight on those.
All right. So we're going to go through some of the names that people sent in, and I think again, thanks for taking the time to send them in. I really appreciate the response. So we had a couple of GTLDs that we wanted to throw in there, and then we threw in a couple .coms and kind of hit a bunch of different verticals so that people can kind of understand what a geo name is like and what a CCTLD is like versus a GTLD, and kind of run the gambit. So if we don't cover something that's really kind of close to what you have to sell, you can write a name in there, and if we have some time at the end, Colby will let us know the name, and we'll just go through some of the names that we get sent in. So the first name that we got sent that we want to go over is goldtrader.club. I want to know what your thoughts are on that.
Want to go first, Paige?
Yeah, I like .club. I think the registry has done one of the best jobs of marketing their TLD, trying to build some prestige around .club, and they've kept going. What's the name again? Gold Trader?
Gold Trader, yeah.
So the fact that it's a 2-word means that you're hoping that the person exhausted all their possibilities for 1 word, like trader.club or gold.club. Maybe it's a 1.5 word because Gold Trader goes together so well, so I'll call it a 1.5 word. But I think right now I'm probably not a fan of it. I probably wouldn't have bought it, but if I owned it, I would still ask $2,500 to $3,000.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm also not a fan of this name, but I looked up goldtraderclub.com, and that's taken, and it says it's a coming soon site with a sign-up page. Sign up for your email,
right.
And so that means that somebody's building in theory, building a business on that. So that would be another consideration for me because you might be losing some traffic to that person. This is a name that probably would have been more valuable 5 years ago if the new G's were out back then, because gold was really hot.
Right.
And so they, all gold names I remember were just, really getting pretty crazy back then. Also, to me, Gold Trader doesn't really make sense. I don't know if you trade gold, you buy gold and you sell gold. I don't know if you trade it. I'm not going to be like, hey, Paige, I'll trade you my gold bar for your gold bar. I don't know if people do that. So, but at the same time, I know it's people who can say, I'm in that trade or profession. So it's not a bad brand. It's not a bad brand, but I wouldn't pay too much for it. So I guess this person, if they hand-regged it, then it's probably worth holding on to. And like Paige said, .club does a great job of promoting the TLD, so that helps too. But so I guess you want a valuation on it. I would not buy that name unless it was a hand wrench.
Okay.
And if I owned it, what would I sell it for? I never sell a name for less than $2,500. I always try to shoot, even for my crappiest names, I try to get 5K. So I guess I would be pricing that in the 2,500 to 5K range.
All right. I looked it up. I checked name bio. I like that you can do the drop down and check for the TLD and just pull back all the results that come back. So I looked at some of the public.club sales. A lot of the one-word clubs came in the $5,000 to $7,000 range. Taking out the outliers. And then I looked at Google's keyword tool. I tried to see what's the search volume for this. It's really low. It's 210 monthly searches, which is pretty low. And I looked at, like Ammar said, I threw it into Google to see how many ads are on there, how popular is it, how many search results come back, who are the people that are showing up on the first couple pages. Are they big companies, like Paige alluded to, or mom and pops? And it was mostly mom and pops, so with one small ad. That tells me that my resale value on this is really low. I have a low potential. I also noticed the com was taken, and that's going to cause me some traffic loss, so I'd stay away from it. One thing I did glean from the keyword tool was Sell Gold has about 5,400 searches, and I think that makes a lot more sense. Like Ammar said, you buy and sell, and I could see people getting together in a club like they did a couple of years ago. If that circles around, that would be a great name, and it's available for hand reg right now. So at least it was when I checked yesterday. Sellgold.club, I think, is a much stronger name, and you can go register that. So that goes back to looking at the competition. What other names are out there that you could register, and what is the price? So Buy Gold was taken, that club, and Selling Gold, but I think Sellgold.club is a decent name. I'd rather have that than GoldTrader.club. So I think I would pay reg fee maybe for Gold Trader, but again, I would hopefully sell it for around $1,000 or so.
Yeah, your most likely buyer might be the person that owns the .com. So I'd also go to Domain Tools and see who owns the .com, and also see what other domains, see if they own other domains around it, which means that they understand the value of domains, and then they're more likely to buy your domain. So go see who owns GoldTrader.club, see what other, GoldTraderClub.com, and see what other names they own, and try to sell it to them. Because it's not. Make sure that you're, I don't think it's a trademark issue, so you should be safe to go ahead and talk to them.
And I would try to sell it before the next renewal, and I would keep an eye out to try to upgrade this name. Even if you have a large portfolio, sometimes it's easier to make decisions just based upon one name. So if you spent, a month or two and looked at some of the, expired name lists, like we may do some best available.clubs at some point in time, then you just ask yourself, as long as I'm going to be in a .club, make it be the best .club you can buy, and keep an eye on where that bar is of the best available .club you can be in.
All right, let's jump into the next name, which is New York.cab. New York.cab.
I like this name. And I guess I'm not sure. There's probably, is there a .taxi also? And there's probably a few other extensions that are related to that. So that would be something I would think about and look into. But New York Cab is very brandable. You can't misspell it. It definitely lends credibility. And cabs are obviously ubiquitous in New York. So I think that's a very valuable name. And I would even say maybe Uber would want to buy it, right? Because they want to buy it from their competition, keep it away from the competition, or these other ride-sharing services. So I would definitely put a 5-figure price tag on that name. I wouldn't sell for less than 5 figures. And now, what would I pay for it? I'm in the business of making money. So if I want to make 10x on my investment, I'd probably pay. Maybe I'd pay 5K for that name, and I think it's worth a lot more than that. But if the seller was willing to sell it for 5K, then maybe I'd pay that. I would try to get at least 50K. But that's how much I'd be holding out for. This is one that I would say might be gold. Of my GTLDs, I like this one a lot.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think that that's a really good perspective. Paige, what do you think about this one?
I probably mirror Ammar's feelings. I think if you had a store, I would put this in the front showcase. I would put lights on it. I would put a description about it. I would say I'm in this name to make a lot of money, as opposed to I would not try to sell this name in the wholesale market, because then you're competing against every other possible available GTLD. And even though this one's got some great attributes, it's in the town that uses taxis more than any other in the U.S. You know what I mean? And that's really what makes the name. I think this is one where you do say it's probably a premium name, so you're probably paying a couple $100 a year for the renewal. But I think your buyer's not going to squawk at that at the price that you're looking at getting. I would keep an eye on the pricing of the NY and the NYC. I just looked at the NY it's taken, and just have a general idea of who that was. Maybe even if it's another domain investor, have a relationship with them to the extent that somebody that buys it, you may all do better by selling them all to one person. And I think it's a high pedigree name.
Awesome.
All right, the next one that we have is zerofault.com.
Terrible. It's terrible because first of all, it's usually referred to as no fault. So this is more of a legal term, right? So and so zero fault is a different way of saying it, and it's the number 0 without having the corresponding word 0 to go with it. And so I would probably continue to renew it, just because I hate dropping names. It just hurts me, because it's like an admission of a mistake. But I would continue to renew it, and maybe you get somebody to pay you, I don't know, $500 or $1,000 for it, but I don't know. I think there's too many things wrong with it. There's more wrong with it than right with it. The only thing, well, one of the best things is .com, so that's good. But like I said, it's the wrong term. So to me, unless I'm wrong, maybe you call it zero fault in other places, but I've always heard of it as no fault, and you don't have the corresponding spelled out 0.
Yeah, that's the same things I noticed in it. I also noticed that none of the other TLDs that I could find were registered for it, in addition to everything that you said. So I think those are some red flags. Paige, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I wouldn't buy it. I think I have the same idea. Just too many substitutes. Doesn't have the elements of prestige. I hate to say it. It looks like one of the names I get emails on. Like, say I did own, no fault something. They'd send me one saying it's just as good. It's zero fault. It's the same, but it's not. So 0, and if I got an offer, I'd price it at $99 and be happy, be excited, truly.
All right, the next one is long. It's collaborativeintelligenceprofile.com.
You go first, Paige.
Wow. I haven't done the keyword research. If it was on a drop list and I was scanning it, I'm not even sure it would make my first bucket. But that's not to say if someone knows what this means, that it's not a terrific name. I guess I should have done some pre-research for it. But collaborative intelligence profile. So I'm not a fan. If I owned it, I'd probably put 2,000 on it, just because if it is a product, if it's a product you can sell online, that would be terrific, because you can deliver the product, make the commission, or make the lead gen amount online without having to physically mail something. So those would be the things that I would look for. If it was a term of art used in a business, then I would ask more. But if not, I would probably ask 2,000 to 3,000. But because I don't know what it is, I'm not sure it would catch my eye if it was on a drop list.
Yeah, I see where the owner is going with it. It's crowdsourced intelligence, and and crowdsourcing is great, and it's very popular, but it's just long. It's a mouthful, and I think probably at least 50% of the time somebody would typo that trying to type it in, even if they were somebody smart. If you're just in a rush, you make mistakes when you're typing, and it's just too long. I think collaborative intelligence would be a much better domain obviously, I would assume if they got profiled, and that means the one without profile is taken already. So this is one I would not register, and I would also not renew.
And it's got a trademark from '99.
The collaborative intelligence profile does? Okay.
Or maybe it's a word mark or a. I didn't look at the strength of it, but.
Well, we don't know if it's live or dead. If it's dead, then that means somebody tried to build something around it and they failed probably, and they let their trademark go, which makes it even less valuable to me.
I think where this would have value is if somehow we all knew what this was and we all called it like a CIP. I mean, or something like that where the name had risen to such a level that we were all familiar with it. At the same point, again, talking out of both sides of my mouth, you say, well, once it gets to that level, you can't really buy it. So you really have to have a good idea of the trajectory, that you think this name is on. Oh,
so sorry to interrupting. I'm taking too much time here, but that brought up another important point that I wanted to mention. There's a lot of things that people are experts in, right? So. And I highly recommend registering names and specializing in something that you know a lot about. Because if this person is an expert in collaborative intelligence and they know that collaborative intelligence profile is something that's real, and then by all means they should buy that name, they should register it, and they should register other names around it. So I always believe it shouldn't be the only part of your portfolio, but certainly a piece of your portfolio should be centered around subjects that you are very familiar with or maybe an expert in, because then you can find those gems that the general population wouldn't find, but somebody in that industry would be interested in, and then there would be more end users for that term that Paige and I wouldn't generally think about just off the top of our heads. Right, so like I love cars, so I love registering car domains, right? But I don't know anything about collaborative intelligence or intelligence at all. So I'm pretty stupid, so I don't register names around those kind of terms. So I think registering and playing in a sandbox in which you are very familiar is a big advantage, and people should definitely take advantage of that when they're registering.
I just want to call out two.
Actually, I want to just jump in since I mentioned the word trademark. It is a canceled trademark, so it was canceled in 2012. So I guess they had it for a while. So I want to take away any, any sense that there's issues with this name with a live trademark. So anyway, there's my.
That's good to bring up. I want to call out two things that I heard you guys say a little bit, but I don't think we covered specifically, which I think is important for people to know. One thing that we talk about when we look at a value for a name internally is we call it the radio test, or like if you heard it on an advertisement or maybe you shared it with somebody at a cocktail party, is that something they're going to remember 2 days from now when they need to share it with their friend? Is it something that they're going to be able to bring home and say, oh yeah, I heard about this great website. It's it's collaborativeintelligenceprofile.com. That's a mouthful to say. It's hard to remember and it is hard to spell. So I think that is a hard time with the radio test, being able to say, 3 days from now, hey, here's where you need to go. If you want to learn about cars, you should go to cars.com. That's real easy. You hear that once, you remember cars.com, and you can share it with people. So you need to think about that when you're talking about it. And the other thing I think that you brought up, which is really key when you're looking at a name, is the authority that it gives you. So if this is a real term in the industry, and I looked it up, it looks like it goes by a couple different terms. But if this was the term that you want to be known by, having that exact match domain name gives you that authority in that area. So when people think about collaborative intelligence, if it's collaborative intelligence profile, maybe it's a test or something else that you're going to offer, they go to that exact match name, and that gives you that credibility in that area. So that authority is worth money in and of itself. Which with that, you both brought those things up, but I wanted to kind of tease that out a little bit and spell it out a little more.
Yeah. Before we go to another domain, should we get to a couple questions since we're getting short?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. So one question for you guys. Johnny wants to know, he owns the .com version of a domain of which the .net sold an afternick for about $2K. Is there any way to determine the price based on what the .net sold for?
Did the person who bought the .net approach him about buying the .com?
That's unknown, but we'll ask. Johnny, let us know.
Because to me that doesn't make any sense. My guess is the person tried to buy the .com, they didn't like the number, and they went and bought the .net. But if not, then that's a perfect buyer. And the other question would be, did the person overpay for the .net? So you'd have to see if they overpaid for it. But if not, if they pay $2K for the .net and it's fairly valued, I would say that the .com should be, in the $50K range. Maybe, we always play with big numbers, so I would say 25 to 75, which is a ridiculous range. But as Paige alluded to earlier, you kind of have to feel out who the buyer is, and also how badly do you want to sell the name.
Good point. Paige, you got anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think in today's market, if a .net went for 2,000, then you are looking at a com that's strong 50, 100, 150. Now, Ammar's comment about overpaying, we report all the sales in one place, no matter what the venue is, no matter what the strength of the position of the buyer or the seller was, and there's a lot of variances there in terms of what they do. But yeah, I think it's a good indicator that you have a strong generic keyword problem.
Awesome. And then our next question is, does PageRank have any effect on the selling price? Do we need to, and also, do they need to enable privacy on the domains?
I would not have my domains proxied unless you were worried about the content of the domain name, or if you had a specific reason to do it. But in general, you want to give people as many different ways to contact you as possible. And it also, for some people, get scared off by privacy protection. They think that there's something nefarious going on, even though it's totally legit. And I have some of my domains, privacy protected. So, what was the other part of the question?
Does PageRank affect this?
I mean, a naked domain is not going to generally have PageRank. So unless it's, from when it was developed before. So if you pick something up on the drop and it has still the PageRank from before, that PageRank's going to go away in the not too distant future. So I guess you could say there is value for the short term for having that PageRank. But if it's just a naked domain, then I don't think that value is very important.
Yeah, I would say you would really have to have experienced it personally yourself, of what happens when you buy a high PageRank domain name. In the secondary market, I would think that if you continued to use the same name for the same purpose, that it would be a valuable attribute to the domain name. But if we're talking about an expired name or an expired name auction, you would have to have already experienced what you have to do to keep that PageRank, I think, to really know what you were doing, to know whether it was going to, stay with you, if that's the reason you were buying a name. In other words, if you're taking a name that normally you wouldn't pay $300 or $3,000 for, but you say, I will, because it has a high PageRank, I would want to know that you'd already experienced how to make sure you keep that PageRank, and you knew how to do it, as opposed to you just thought you were getting a gift.
Yeah, those are good points. And then, so we've touched on brandability a little bit too, during this. Oren wants to know, what are your thoughts on how to evaluate brandable domains when selling in the aftermarket? Any tips on where to sell? It seems that they get lost in the mix when selling in auctions, especially if selling at end user prices.
Well, brandables, you're never going to get the right value selling in an auction. The brandables, the way you extract the right value is when you find the end user that really loves that brand and wants to buy it. So if you're looking to flip them fast, then unless it's an amazing brandable, you're probably not going to get great value for it in the auction.
Cool.
And on any platform, I don't think.
So I think a brandable domain name we've defined as a name that doesn't earn its reg fee in traffic. We all discovered that those names then became, I'll sell this as a brandable name. But I think what you're talking about here is a Trulio or a Zillow or a Babazoo or something like that. Hey Joe, I'd ask you this question: In the spinning that you guys do, I would really, if I was in this market, I would really want to understand whether having a component of the word like gold or social or stock got my name into some of the spinning when someone typed in for golf.com and it wasn't there. Does price matter when you guys do your spinning? In other words, could you price it at a reasonable price as opposed to the high retail and maybe show up better in the spinning?
Most of the time when we do spin results, it's not as effective as somebody for an exact match, and I think that's going to be even more true when you're talking about a brandable name. You're going to need that buyer that really wants that name, and they're going to be looking for it. So I don't think you're really going to get a benefit from pricing it at a different price point. The only thing that you might do in a true brandable name, like you brought up, you're going to probably price it too low, because you're not waiting for that right buyer that's going to come along and say, hey, this is the brand that I want to start my business on. You're just throwing it out there, and when that right buyer comes along, he's going to say, oh, yeah, okay, this is a real good deal, I'm taking it. Otherwise, they would just contact you anyway. So I'd put it on the auction with an offer counteroffer. That way it's going to show up in the purchase path for GoDaddy. They'll see it's available, but they're going to have to come to you and make an offer, and then you can start that negotiation process.
You know, there was a great post about a year ago of a guy, and I'm just thinking about this now, and I should do it for all my brandable names, so I'll encourage you guys to do it, which is make a landing page and put the content of your landing page should be centered around the keyword domain name, brandable domain name for gold, brandable domain name for golf, and he actually had someone search, you know, for those terms, and because he had those prevalent in his landing page, in a world where there may not be a lot of results for that name, it actually came up. So I was thinking back to how would I really try to aggressively market a brandable when you're just hoping to get lucky, and I think that might be one way to do it, is have content on the landing page relating to the fact that this is a brandable domain name for the following industries.
I think that's a great tip. I hadn't heard of that before, but that's a great idea.
Cool. And then there's actually, so two-part question again, one more. This one's not on our list of domains, but I'm going to throw it at you guys anyway to see what you think. So KJ wants to know, what do you think of the name Inauguration2017.org? The .com was taken. So my question on this is, what do you guys think of the domain for the value of it? And then the second half of it is, what do you guys think of domains with hard dates on them anyway, like an event that's coming up in the next year or two?
Well, it obviously then has a limited shelf life. And Inauguration2017.org, who's going to be the potential buyer? I mean, I guess, you know, if the government's not going to buy it, I mean, there's probably multiple inaugurations in 2017, not just for the president, but I don't know. It's the .org. I think that's, in this case, it might be okay, but I don't really like I wouldn't buy. Well, I don't know. I mean, I know some people would, right? I wouldn't buy Olympics 2020 or 20 whatever 16, right? Like, I don't know. Even though you can make money on it for a period of time. First of all, Olympics is a trademark, right? But things like that, I guess. I don't generally buy things with hard dates.
Fair enough.
I think that brings up a good thing that I really forgot to mention. One of the key things I look at when I try and put a value on a name is this a fad or a trend, or is this something that's going to be around for a long time, right? If it's a funeral, they're always going to be there, right? But if you're looking at something that's a fad, that's not going to be around for a long time, or technology that gets outdated, like a typewriter or an answering machine or things like that. How long are things going to be around in the technology space, or fads that come up? It might be really hot, like 3G, and then all of a sudden now we're on 4G, and then we're on LTE, right? Things change fast, and on the internet they're going to change even faster. They're going to change with things ahead of the curve. So you need to make sure when you're looking at a name and you want to put a price on it that you figure out, is this a trend? Is this something that's going to get outdated in a couple of years, or is this something that's going to be around for the long haul? Like New York.cab, they've been around for a long time, hundreds of years. Even when they were horse and buggies, they're going to be around for a long time. I don't see them going anywhere. But if it was something like, I want to buy wireless 4G, that's got a shelf life that's over. So you need to be able to figure those things out when you're trying to put a price on a name, because you have to think about long term. If I'm a business that wants to invest in this name, how long am I going to get my return on the investment before it's over?
Well, so it's funny that you brought up that point, though, with the 4G wireless or whatever. So, but there's also examples where a domain can have a resurgence in value or a different meaning. So back in the day, I remember I was looking at buying CD.com, I think, and man, or DVD.com, right? But CD.com is a better example now. So CD.com, back then, compact discs, it was really, really a valuable, very valuable name. And then you thought, well, it could also be a certificate of deposit, so you could hedge your bets a little bit. But then, when CDs went away and everything became streaming, then that value, the value of that name went down. But now the two letters have become so valuable and have come back so strong. Now, man, you wish you never sold that name, or I wish I bought it when I could have bought it for whatever. It seemed cheap at the time now, in retrospect. So you want to, but a name like Inauguration 2017 is never going to come back. It's never, unless something so big happened at that inauguration. Like we had the first, lesbian, black, Muslim president of the United States ever. Then maybe you want to have Inauguration 2017 because that was such a watershed moment. But that's not going to happen, and so I don't think that has value or a lot of value.
Awesome. So I know we're at our time, so I want to just see, do you want to evaluate another domain, or do you want to get through a couple more questions we have real quick? Or
You guys have time to stick around for a little bit?
Sure.
Yeah.
All right.
So do you want to go to evaluation, or to,
let's do one last valuation. So I want to get your guys' opinion on it since we're selling it. It's a little shameless plug. But the other thing that I think is cool about it is that you're both very involved with Los Angeles. So we want to get your take on LA.com.
So as I told you before we started the show, I actually used to be one of the owners of LA.com, which you didn't know, but we sold it to the newspaper, Gannett, and then Gannett did a deal with the current owner. They did some kind of trade, I guess, and now the current owner is trying to sell it. So I don't know what the asking price is, but it has two huge things going for it. A, it's a two-letter.com, which has multiple meanings. It can mean the in French, and so that's a good thing. I'm probably in some other languages too. It's obviously LA, one of the most famous cities in the world, the economy of LA is larger than most countries. So it's for that regard, it's a very valuable name, very valuable city with a lot of people that you can market to. So I definitely think it's a seven-figure name. The question is how high into the seven figures. It could even go into the 8 for the right buyer. But I don't know who the right buyer is for that. That's actually going to take it and develop it. So most likely it'll go to some investor who's been gobbling up two-letter domains, is my guess. But so I would put it. I would aim for 3 to 5 on it. Is probably what I'd put it at. But it could go higher.
Yeah, I think it's always interesting to try and value names that are in that high range.
Yeah. Paige, what about you? What are your thoughts?
So it's interesting. We talked about, I do a thing called Domain University. We talk about names having value from different places. And even though the two-letter trend has brought the value of the name up, so if this was 5 years ago, LA.com would probably be worth 20 to 50 to 100 times any normal two-letter. You know what I mean? Because it had this clear use as LA.com. And so the fact that the bottom of the two-letter market has been rising, where any two-letter whatsoever has gotten up to 5, 6, 8, 900,000, it almost doesn't come into play until it pushes past where LA is as an operating business, as a web services portal for Los Angeles. So I think, one, I'd like to see the numbers on how it did as an operating services portal in Los Angeles. You know what I mean? And if it earned $500,000 a year or $1 million a year, then you've got a valuable operating asset that just needs to be run. as opposed to maybe selling it as a pure domain name. So the fact that 2 letters are valuable, I think, is great, but you're hoping that this one's going to have more because of the specific 2 letters, that are involved here. I think that in the midst of a time when we should see 2 letters going to $1 million, that I'm going to say 5 million, and it could be our first $10 million domain. That wouldn't be out of the park, only because we're still making up these numbers. I mean, we are not going to Investors Business Daily and typing in a formula and saying LA.com is worth this. Someone is saying how much for it. And the moment that you say on the phone, we're selling it for, you could say 2 million, 3 million, 5 million, 8 million, 10 million, and that number is completely coming from what you think you'd like to have, for it right now. And if someone says, fine, we'll buy it for 10 million, your first thought's going to be, crap, it was worth 15. You know what I mean? So we still haven't explored the top end. So this could be one that pushes the envelope because of its desirability. So,
but if there's a buyer, if there's an end user, do you agree that it's likely going to be just an investor who's
But I think what's happened is, even though the wholesale value of a name shouldn't affect the retail price, in other words, LA.com as an operating business shouldn't be worth any more, but the fact that it's such a sure thing now that every 2 letter is worth 600,000-800,000, and so many assets don't have that underlying sure thing underneath them, that I think it helps the buyer rationalize paying an all-time price, because even if they say, well, we might have overpaid by something or something. There's all kinds of places where people are overpaying, by a lot more. So somehow the magic of this tradability and the wholesale value at the bottom pushing it up, even though it shouldn't really push up its max value. You know what I mean? It seems like it probably will. I mean, look at the art market, man. Someone paid $260 million for a piece of art,
right,
and because they wanted it. And so,
and that's why I'm saying I think it's going to be an investor. I don't think it's going. I don't believe the company itself or the site makes a lot of money. So I don't think you're going to value it based on that. And I don't know if you're going to want to continue to run it because it costs money to run it. So I think it's going to be somebody who really just believes that this 2-letter thing is going to keep going up. But who knows?
Well, that's interesting. Can you believe that 10 years ago, Ammar, we'd be talking about owning LA.com and not putting an operating business on it because
right,
scarcity value would be more than the natural use of it,
Right.
But yeah, I think you're right.
All right, before we get to any more questions, I just want to give you guys an opportunity to plug anything that you're working on or anything you want to share. And then we'll wrap up with the rest of the questions. So we'll start with
yeah, I'm working on like I said, I love cars, so I'm working on my new projects called autobio.com, and I'm hoping to have a beta of it by hopefully sometime early November, in time for the SEMA show in Vegas. So we'll see, but that's something I'm passionate about, and it's online, it's focused on a domain name, and so I'm still doing my domain investing and other things, but I'm trying something a little bit outside the domain business.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a lot of fun, and I want to check it out.
Yeah.
Ammar, you wouldn't believe it. After you told me about what you were doing about a month ago, I was at a party here, and a guy was telling a story about the car he owned as a senior in high school. The tubes, the lifters, the this, that. I mean, he went through every single component about his car. And I said, what if you could find out where that car was today, or what if you could buy it again? It was really interesting. So congratulations. I hope your thing works out.
Thank you.
Let's see. We are still promoting .la, and then we're going to start a TV show called dntv.tv. So it's going to be a daily video TV show, wrap-up of the domain industry for domain name owners, investors, and for the domain name industry. So I did it back in 2008, and I think I was a little early on the whole video mobile trend. So maybe now I'll be just at the right spot. And just like you guys are watching this video, it'll be a chance to go over what's going on in the industry, tips, tricks, and some research.
That sounds really cool.
That's awesome.
When's that going to start?
Well, a soft launch here the next week, and then October 1st will be our first real show. So we're kind of mixing like the Daily Show, Jim Cramer, and the Men in Blazers podcast, if you're a soccer or football fan. And stir it all up, and something's going to come out of it. So
That sounds great. I'm looking forward to it.
That's awesome.
If we need a guest, we'll just we'll send Joe down there too.
Yeah, I can be on the soundboard like Kramer's guy.
absolutely.
All right, and I just gotta say too, Paige, I love .la and Hi Mom in the upper right corner. Reminds me of Sports Nation. All right, so final question, David Cruz. For someone that's new and getting into the aftermarket and really wants to make a solid attempt at buying and selling domains, what's your advice? What advice would you give to people just starting out and trying to get into do what you guys do, basically?
For me, I would say quality over quantity. Depending on what his budget is that he has to invest, I would try to buy fewer names that are better, that are more likely to sell. You might want to take 10% of your investable amount and put some long shots in there. But overall, I think if you're buying quality, then you're always going to be able to sell that, right? At some point, we're not in a liquid business, but if you're buying good quality stuff, usually you're probably buying it on the wholesale market, which probably means that you can always go back and resell it on the wholesale market for, hopefully, if you're good, at around or what you paid for it. So you shouldn't be losing too much money. So I would rather have fewer, better names, and that also reduces your renewal fees, and it's easier to manage. So especially if you're just starting out, I think you want to keep things lean and easy to manage.
Solid tip.
Good advice.
Paige?
Yeah, I think the same thing. One of the metaphors I'll use, because I seem to come up with a lot of them, would be like if you have shelves on a wall and you want to have 10 great names, give yourself a year to find those 10 great names. Don't feel like you have to fill up your shelves really fast with what's available right now. Have some higher expectations, like what Ammar said, and realize that it's going to be a confluence of finding a great name that maybe no one else has found, that's on a platform that no one uses, of a trend that really is going to have some legs. I mean, we all want to make the trend that we buy be the one that's going to be incredible. But it doesn't matter what we think, it matters what the rest of the world thinks. And leave yourself some room to say, I'm only going to really buy when I get lucky and fall into a great situation. And then I think when you have those type of names, like what Ammar mentioned, you'll feel better over time. Then you almost have to tell yourself that what's being offered to you, you shouldn't buy, and what you have, no one wants. And just tell yourself that, you know what I mean? And then say, that's the business I'm getting into, because when you look at the drop list, there's 70,000 names that people didn't think were worth $8. And you got to tell yourself you're going through the trash. Now, you can still find something that you really like, but don't forget it's kind of being made available for a reason. So be realistic, be greedy, and try to have high expectations.
Right on. And then, Joe, I'm actually going to throw that over to you, too. What's your advice?
I like the quality over quantity, especially when you're trying to figure things out for reg fees and renewals. That's going to cost you some money. I think there's a time to be greedy. That's true, and there's a time to sell just to make sure you can cover. So if you bought like 30 names and you got an offer for $300 on a name, might as well take advantage of that. Cover your reg fees for next year. You can kind of hold out, and then try and build up. But I really think it's important to ask a lot of questions from people rather than just go out there and try and buy names. There's great places you can go. I think it's really, I bounce things off people all the time. I bounce stuff off Paige and Ammar. You can go to namepros.com, DN Forum. You can go check out some of these places where domainers congregate and ask questions, and people will give you feedback. Hey, I'm thinking about buying a name. Might not be your best bet because then somebody might pick it up if it's a great name. But hey, here's a couple of the names I bought. I bought these 3. What do you think about them? That way you can see if you're on the right trajectory, if you're buying the right kinds of names or not, and then you can adjust. and kind of move on. And also, it's important to look at what's selling, so you can kind of figure out what type of names are people interested in buying, and ask those kind of questions on the forums too, so you can kind of get a better feel for what do you want to invest in for your quality of names.
Awesome. Well, sweet, guys. Thank you very much. I know there's still some other questions out there and whatnot, and we didn't get to you live, but I'm going to volunteer Joe over here to get to those after the show via comments. So we'll follow up with you there. But, Paige, Ammar, I just want to thank you guys for taking the time to come on. You guys gave some great advice and some great tips. It's been really awesome.
No problem. Thank you.
All right. Thanks to GoDaddy for providing this platform.
Yeah, it's go time.
That's right.
Go time.
Thanks a lot. I think this is really valuable, and I think people appreciate it a lot. So thanks for your time. I know you're both busy.
All right, guys. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
You too. Bye.